Guys, welcome to the First Responder Playbook. I am blessed to have Keith Grounsell with me today. I'm going to let him talk about his own achievements and career, but this man's got a list of career achievements that most law enforcement officers can only dream of ever having. Keith, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hey, Brent, appreciate you having me on here first and foremost, talking to other first responders and police officers around the United States, around the world. Been in law enforcement 26 plus years, coming up on 27 years. Two-time chief of police. I've been blessed enough to have kind of worked at every single level. Worked at the city as a municipal police officer, county sheriff's office as a narcotics investigator, with the state Department of Juvenile Justice. Went federal. I was a special agent with the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration for a period of time. Concentrated predominantly in undercover work for about 6 total years between the city, county, and then the feds. And that was one of my favorite assignments. And then I started doing international policing. We were just talking about that offline a little bit, where policing missions in Afghanistan back at the height of the war. I was there for just under 3 years, a little over 2 years, and came back after an injury I sustained, got back into policing here, worked my way up, became a chief of police after being a lead investigator. And man, a lot of stories in my background, fighting corruption all the way to doing community policing, you name it. Then I went back over internationally for about 4 more years in Haiti, and then West Africa and Liberia, traveled to India, Jordan, other countries, working on U.S. Department of State contracts, doing international policing missions, and came back home, was kind of tired, and got back in and became a chief of police again. I guess I was glutton for punishment, dealing with politics again. And I recently, I guess, semi-retired about a little over a year ago, and now I consult, I do training. And like I just said offline with you a minute ago, where I'm actually about to go back overseas again for another year.
So let me ask you this. I mean, was law enforcement always the plan?
My father was a United States Marine, 22 years enlisted man. That's all I kind of knew was some form of public service. I knew I wanted to serve, and I didn't want to necessarily, what I say, sit behind a desk.
Yep.
Kind of wanted the unknown, the excitement of the career of law enforcement or the military. And I jokingly say I didn't want to sit behind a desk, and I later on became a chief of police. So if that, how that works, it's kind of odd to say that, but I consider myself a hands-on leader, like to get out in the community, be there with my officers, show up on a traffic stop if something's going down, and actually don't take over anything, just be there in a supportive role. And let them know, I hadn't forgot where I come from. And I think that's very important. So, no, I didn't know if I was going to be a police officer or the military, but I always knew I wanted to do some form of public service.
That's awesome. My dad was in law enforcement for 40 years, and I was actually the complete opposite. I never wanted to do anything like that. And yeah, absolutely. And now I can't picture myself doing anything else.
Exactly.
My last semester in college, my dad said, "Hey, man," he's sheriff here in Oklahoma. He'd retired from the state highway patrol, and he's like, "Hey, come ride along with one of my deputies." And I'm like, "No, that's not what I want to do." He's like, I was kind of dispatching part-time during the summers, just a summer job, and he's like, "Just come do a ride along." No, I know all these guys. I don't want to do that. And I rode one time, and it was just one of those shifts where they went call to call and jailed about 3 times. I'm like, "Man, this is awesome." And at the end of the night, my dad texted me and said, "Well, don't forget, that was the fun stuff. Now it's paperwork time." And, I thought for sure that, I was going to go do something completely different. And here I am 10 years later, and I'm like, it's a great career because there's always something new.
It is. I jokingly say 5 minutes of action for 12 hours of paperwork. And it's funny, you said, you started your career in dispatch. I believe a lot of people who come from either a dispatch background or a corrections or jailer, corrections officer background, I believe that gives them a leg up, understanding the 10 codes and the communications and understanding what it entails on that side, that first line of communications with the citizens is very important, just as important as a corrections officer, understanding how to talk to people. You got to learn that verbal judo, or whatever you want to call it, the ability to de-escalate situations and not always try and size up people in order to get into a physical confrontation. So I believe both of those, coming in, it gives you a stronger foundation as a police officer.
Absolutely. After being in dispatch, I dispatch on and off for 5 years. They are the ones that truly speak to the person in their moment of crisis or absolute moment of need, because that's when that 911 call is made.
Yeah,
And for
they're
what
going to either gather the information that we need that's necessary to save our lives or save somebody else's life, or they're going to miss it. And a great dispatcher is a lifeline, without
Yeah,
a doubt.
and I wholeheartedly agree with you. Corrections officers, dispatchers, they're completely underpaid for what they do, because they deal with a lot that the officers don't have to deal with,
Yeah,
and the officers do a lot too. But I don't ever forget about corrections and dispatch, because, and I tried to be that guy, like, hey, if there's something we can help out in the jail while we're there taking a prisoner, and we'll help out,
yeah,
or if I need to go get y'all food and dispatch, whatever the case may be, like. I always tried to take care of them, because at the end of the day, I wanted them to take care of me when, push came to
yeah.
shove.
Yeah, at the end of the day, we're all on the same team. And I think sometimes in modern law enforcement that we forget that often. And we're so quick, we have so much scrutiny on everything that we do, and we're held to such a high standard that it's easy for some people to throw somebody else under the bus, and so to speak. And I think that creates some dissension at times, but we could do a better job from a leadership perspective at making sure we all understand we're all on the same team. We all have the same goal at the end of the day, for all of us to make it home safely and to save lives. And that's what we got in this line of work for.
Absolutely. So you kind of touched on it already, but you said you did municipal police work, county sheriff police work. Sorry, deputies out there, I said police.
There's a
You,
few county police. I
yeah,
think we have one in the state of South Carolina
yeah.
near the beach.
You did a little bit of state work. Like, they're all different. For people that
Absolutely.
have never done law enforcement, they're all completely different in how they operate,
Yeah.
how close backup is, the type of calls. What was your favorite one? Like, if you just had to choose, like, hey, this is my favorite, what was your
Yeah.
favorite?
I mean, just in generally speaking, I can tell you I had the most fun based upon my time working undercover. And that
Yeah.
was both at the municipal level and at the sheriff's office.
Okay.
So that is all contingent. What's my favorite is really contingent upon the leadership.
Yep.
So if you have poor leadership that doesn't support an officer like me, I was a very assertive officer. I used to say aggressive. Then I learned, hey, don't say aggressive.
Yep.
But in reality, I'm a sort of aggressive person. That's in my personality. I have that dog in me. When I was going after somebody, there was nothing, no stone unturned, nothing I wasn't going to do was within the scope of the law in order to be successful and take that person down. And that's where, for me, if the leadership's great, the leadership has your back, the leadership understands you're going to make errors, especially as a young officer, as long as you have good intentions. Don't fault that officer to the point where you destroy their whole career because they made a small mistake. And now, honestly, if you lie about it, you made a mistake and then you lie, then that's an ethical integrity issue. But if you make an honest mistake, you should be able to survive that in this career, especially modern day law enforcement. I got in when there were vehicle cameras in some of the cars. Now you have a body camera, vehicle camera, you got surveillance cameras everywhere. Everybody's got a cell phone. Things have changed, and law enforcement's under the gun a lot more than they ever were before. So I don't think it's that we've gotten worse. We just take more scrutiny because everybody has a social media platform where they can claim to be experts and show a 10-second video from a 10-minute incident and try and claim this is, oh my God, this is what happened. And it's not the reality.
Yeah, absolutely. And unfortunately, that's the world we live in. And
No
that's
doubt.
why I try to tell guys, a lot of times you'll see guys, well, I don't want a body camera. Well, they don't really, there's, if you're not doing anything wrong, there's nothing that they're going to show that, you know, get you in trouble or anything like that. Like, they're going to help you prove your case that, hey, I did everything by the book, and, here we are. It's
Oh
not a
yeah.
bad thing.
No doubt. And I was a chief of police when body cameras, first came onto the scene. And I'm not going to lie to you. I felt like at first looking at it, I was like, oh, here's just another thing we're responsible for. Turn it on. If we don't turn it on, we're going to get in trouble. All this scrutiny is going to be behind it. They're going to Monday morning quarterback everything we did. But in actuality, 95% of the time, that body camera footage proved the officer right, actually proved that they handled the situation properly. And really, it solidifies the deal. Unfortunately, ever since, like, I guess 20 years ago when the TV show CSI first came out, I always call it the CSI effect. Everybody expects video, fingerprints, DNA, all these things that are somewhat unrealistic at times. But with video technology out there, if there's no video, it's almost not believed. And that's a sad reality with law enforcement nowadays, that our testimony alone is not believed anymore because of a few bad apples have been publicized all over social media, and they just take away our credibility.
Yep. I'll never forget when I was a young officer. We had a detective, and as a young officer, they cover the basics of like evidence collection with you in the academy. But like, if you don't do it on a regular basis, like like collecting blood and stuff like that, like usually that's something you kind of hold the scene, call your investigations out. At least in Oklahoma.
Yeah.
And we had a burglary. I'll never forget. The guy was a over the road trucker, and he hadn't been there in, I don't know, a week or two. He comes back and his RV had been broken into. Well, he calls us and he says, hey, like, there's some dried up blood out here. It's been a couple days, at least since I've been here. And our investigator at the time at the small agency I was at, he's just like, well, I'm not coming out for that. And I'm like, bro, like this. And the sad thing was this guy's his father was a deceased veteran, and the flag that was draped over his coffin, he had it like in a shadow box. Wow. And the thief stole that along with some other stuff that could be tracked. Yeah, so me being me, I'm like, dude, like this makes me mad that my investigator won't come out. And are you familiar with Leads Online?
Absolutely, yeah.
So we had a Leads Online account, and I used that, and I'd actually tracked him to that day. Nice. Pawning the stuff. And so we got that back.
Yeah.
And I found out that I just happened to do like and it's been a minute since I've used Leads Online, but there was a section where I could put like American flag, in a shadow box, and it actually was pawned the same day in Joplin, Missouri, and we were able to get that back because I took that extra step of I'm not going to allow my investigations just to say, we're not coming out. We're not going to work it. Like,
sometimes I believe we're our own worst enemy. We have a level of complacency. You may have processed 10,000 auto breakings over the years and realize this small percentage of auto breakings when it rains or because of dew on the car is a low probability that we'll ever get any fingerprints off the car. But that's not a reason not to go out there, because the sheer fact that you don't even respond out there sends a message to that citizen who we ultimately work for that, it's not important. But to them, that auto breaking was the worst thing that's happened to them maybe in many, many years. And when we send that message, it sends a level of distrust for the police. And you have to, at least show them you're trying everything. It doesn't matter if you get fingerprints or not. The fact that you attempted to get them, I think, is more important from a community standards perspective.
Oh, wholeheartedly. They want to see that you guys are, your guys are out there and ladies are out there working, and just attempting to make that effort, because that is their moment of crisis, regardless if it's just a vehicle burglary that you've taken 6 that day. To them, that's their moment of need. No doubt. And we've got to give them 1,000%, just like we would anybody else.
Yeah. And you kind of hit on something with Leads Online and things like that and other platforms that we have access to in databases as law enforcement. Technology, our Office of Technology, in my last position as chief of police, I brought in a 20-plus year IT specialist to become a police officer who later became a detective with us. And they were able to, advance quickly in how to write certain specific search warrants, to get into cellular phones, working with Gray Key and other Cellbrite, other systems, something that a law enforcement officer with minimal background from an IT experience maybe would take many years to establish that level of knowledge. But I brought this individual in, they hit the ground running immediately and made a huge impact, and dozens of arrests, and solidified a lot of cases that he never touched by merely taking the cell phones, dumping them, and knowing where to look for the data that may be hidden in certain aspects.
Well, yeah, I mean, if we break it down to like the granular level, our phone's a computer, you know,
Absolutely.
and as long as they've got a smartphone, there's tons of data on there, and criminals will definitely use phones to commit crimes. And that goes from anything from prostitution to drugs to burglaries to everything. And if we're not using the technology that's available, we're failing our people.
Yeah. And I remember my last position, my second time as a chief of police, I went to the city administrator, the mayor there, and I asked them for money to purchase license plate readers. They were rather expensive. I knew that nobody in our area had those yet. And I knew that that was a force multiplier for us, but it was a price tag of around about $80,000 to get as many as we were looking for to put around the city. And they told me no. So I was like, okay, well, no doesn't mean no to me as a leader. That means you need to find another route other than utilizing taxpayers' funds. So we put together sponsor sheets and we went business to business. And I utilized some of my officers that had standing established relationships with business owners and citizens. And we had them sign anywhere from a 1 year to a 5-year pledge that they would sponsor a camera. And that camera would be put generally somewhere close by to their business where they got some sort of a benefit from it. But some of the bigger corporations really didn't care. I walked in within 5 minutes, I'm walking out with a $15,000 check because merely they needed to have the write-offs for the year. We established a 501c3 nonprofit organization within our police department, and we were getting checks, and we paid for all the license plate readers, and we got this advanced technology. We started taking auto thefts out big time. Obviously, it increased our pursuits. We were solving crimes at a rapid pace, and it just became another tool that was a force multiplier for us. But I didn't take no for an answer. And I think a lot of law enforcement agencies now, and even a lot of leaders, they see, oh, we can't afford that. It's not in the budget. Well, that's not an excuse not to do it. You can start a community program by merely getting somebody who's interested in that aspect of helping the community and have them sponsor it, throw their name on it. And I think that's important. That's something we fail at as law enforcement leaders. In law enforcement, we are quick to say, well, we can't afford that. That's not in the budget. So just say no. It's easier than actually doing some work and going out there and introducing some idea to the community and selling it to the citizens and then getting them to sponsor it in a partnership. It really went a long ways to help crime.
Absolutely. You have to think outside the box, and if you're not willing to do that, then, come back and be a patrolman because we need people up there in the leadership spots that are willing to take that chance,
Yeah, and you say that lightheartedly, but the reality is don't forget what the patrolman needs when you are in that top tier leadership position, because I believe as a chief, my job is the higher up I go in the ranks, the higher and the greater my responsibility to serve my people. And if you go in with that mindset that every day you have to be thinking, what's something I can bring to the table for my people to help them? Is it to get them outer vest carriers? Is it to get them? I had an officer that was 6'10". He had back problems. I had to get him in a certain type of car, put a certain type of armrest. It is the little things like that. Like I went to an agency that didn't even have mobile data terminals, MDTs in their car. For Christ's sake, didn't have access to the internet. You have to give them the tools so they can be successful on the road. Otherwise, you're hindering their success in solving crime and deterring crime in the community.
Oh, wholeheartedly. So let me touch on you don't hear it too often. How do you get into undercover work?
Yeah. So for me, when I started out, I spent about 3 years on the road with the first agency I went to, a municipality, 20 something thousand people surrounded by 7 other municipalities in the big suburbs of upper state or Greenville, South Carolina, one of the top 3 largest counties in the state of South Carolina. And I really had a knack for going after drug dealers. And it wasn't because I had a background of doing anything with drugs. I just got a high off of making a drug bust. And I left that agency after 3 years, got recruited to work at Greenville City Police Department. And when I'm in orientation, my second day, I believe my second day in, they yanked me out of orientation, said, follow me, basically, as two guys with beards in plain clothes, and they had guns and badges around their neck. And he's like, follow me. We went to the captain's office. They said, from now on, you're assigned to vice narcotics. You're going to be working undercover. You can't associate with any police officers. As a matter of fact, we got to push something out that you were terminated because people know you as a cop for using excessive force and failing a drug test. And I was like, whoa. So really, me getting thrown into my first undercover role, I didn't even know it was coming. And I think that's probably a good thing because I didn't even have an opportunity to overthink it or to talk to anybody about it. And they put me in the vice narcotics unit, and I was assigned to the long-term team. We had a short-term team called like the Jump Out Boys. Then we had a long-term narcotics investigative team, and I was assigned there. And I had some very seasoned investigators that took me under their wing. And it was like, all right, we're going to start out with the very basic of undercover. And that's street level. That's what we call video eyes. We had covert cameras built into undercover cars. I posed as a drug addict, as a crackhead, and a heroin addict. And I drove around in these communities. And to my surprise, I ended up buying crack off of 2 convicted cop killers.
Wow.
And I didn't even know the caliber of people I was dealing with. Later on in my career, as my undercovers escalated to going to purchasing ounces, to kilos, to, hundreds of kilo deals, and to busting, with cartels, with the DEA, the high level stuff, I realized how dangerous the local level was compared to the cartel. Don't get me wrong, the cartels will kill you, but they're more likely to blow up your family or kill somebody you love to make you suffer mentally. But the guy on the street, the crackhead that's selling drugs to support a drug habit and working with the local dealer, that's a guy that'll pop you in the face right there because he's high and paranoid. Yep. So it gave me a newfound respect because I was blessed enough to spend a year deep undercover. We busted 70-something people in the first operation. Then I went undercover in what they call the all-night dance parties, the raves, the club drugs.
Yep.
And I did that, and that was like eye-opener. I bleached my hair platinum blonde, got piercings, went into these parties, man, and it was just mind-boggling the amount of drugs. And for a guy who was an athlete, played soccer in college and later on after that, it was just like I never got involved in that type of thing and didn't realize how many people were actually involved in that environment. And I think I brought an interesting thing happened when I was doing that. I purchased ecstasy off of 47 different drug dealers in this operation working undercover. And all the times we tested the ecstasy, obviously it was sent to the lab for evidence. And only one time was it pure MDMA, methylene dioxide, methamphetamine, pure ecstasy.
Right.
All the other times it was a concoction of maybe a little bit of MDMA, but it could have had caffeine, it could have had amphetamines, it could have had meth in it, could have had, fentanyl, heroin, anything in it. And that was what was so scary because these kids, I say kids because some of them were juveniles, and these young adults were out here buying this stuff in the club from these unknown dealers, and never, almost less than 1% of the time was it actually what they said it was going to be.
Yep.
So you don't ever know. And nowadays I think it's even more scary because we got fentanyl. And fentanyl, back in the day we had fentanyl, we had the Actique suckers. It was pharmaceutical grade. I would buy it actually in pharmaceutical packaging. Now the Mexican cartels have perfected it to where it's such a high pure level of fentanyl, and they don't care. They mix it in with the heroin batches, or they sell just straight fentanyl or mix it in and lay something. And honestly, I call it drug hits. I believe they know exactly what they're doing, and they don't mind people dying. Back in the day when you're buying heroin, if a few people overdose, the heroin dealer was like, yeah, I got some good stuff. And the other addicts are like, yeah, I'm going to go buy that. That killed so-and-so. I'm like, what? But nowadays, it's give them some fentanyl, lace some marijuana with fentanyl, and kill somebody. You could do a drug hit, and it just looks like an overdose. And I believe that's what we're facing now, this crisis, the opioid crisis. Over 100,000 people every single year being killed on a consistent basis. That's more than all our wars combined over the last 25 years. Mm-hmm. We have to wake up. And then we have agencies that only devote, on average, the average law enforcement agency devotes 3 to 5% of their staff towards narcotics enforcement. But yet, I believe personally 95% of all crime in some way, shape, or form has a nexus or a linkage to narcotics, whether it's a violent crime from a drug dealer gone bad, a burglary to support a drug habit, a theft to support a drug habit, domestic violence because they're higher under the influence or utilizing drugs. They're all linked. I solved many, many murders working with informants and working undercover. Hell, I even had a guy confess to a murder while I was working undercover to build up his street creds in an undercover transaction. And it was an unsolved murder. So I believe we're failing as leaders by not devoting enough resources. Obviously, uniform patrol is the front lines, and you have to put your resources there. But if we're not putting them on the back burner and having enough narcotics enforcement and even general investigators that have basic understanding of narcotics investigations, then we're failing, and we're going to continue to fail.
Absolutely. I mean, I don't know how many burglaries I've solved, and there's a provable nexus to drugs right
Yeah,
there. It's pretty much almost every one.
yeah.
Yeah, you know.
It's sad, really. I mean, that it's not recognized. I know a lot of people are very uncomfortable. My first time as the chief of police, it was Simpsonville, South Carolina. I walked into the agency, and they had one narcotics investigator, and he's driving a Crown Vic. And I was like, okay, first off, let's give this person the resources to blend into the atmosphere where they're trying to run surveillance, or they're trying to work informants and do these things. So we changed some things around quickly. I put 2 more people down there, had another person temporarily assigned down there, and I brought in a buddy of mine who was a DEA task force agent in Kansas when I was stationed in Kansas with the Drug Enforcement Administration. He came in for a drug-related murder flying into Charlotte, and we just so happened to have him there. I was like, dude, just stay for a few days and train my whole department in basic drug investigations and drug interdiction. And he did. And over the series of about a 2-year period, we increased our drug crimes detected, our drug arrests by 287%. We implemented all these community-based programs, and we went from number 28 safest city in the state of South Carolina to number 1 in the entire state. And it was concentrating on real crimes and real criminals, and then developing the public trust through the community programs where people are picking up the phone and calling you, because we never burned our sources. We would quickly dismiss a case before we're going to burn that source. Yep. And that was important. As a leader, I understood that because I had worked informants, I had worked undercover. I realized if you tell who told, if you snitch them out, so to speak, they likely could be killed. Yep. And they're never going to call you again. And you lose that public trust, and word spreads quickly, especially for negative things about the police.
Yeah, absolutely. So how long did you do undercover total?
So just 6 years. I did 6 years deep undercover. When I got out, I went straight from the Drug Enforcement Administration to Afghanistan. I started contracting. I left the DEA for personal reasons. My ex-wife at the time went through a postpartum depression with her second child. We had no support system. I was working over 100 hours a week, and DEA wouldn't allow me to move back to have an environment where she had a support system. I was undercover, so nobody knew like what I did. All I did was deep undercover work, and that was what I came there to do. And I was dealing with the Mexican cartels on a daily basis, and it was very dangerous. And I enjoyed the work. I enjoyed the agency. I love seeing where it's going right now under President Trump. They're actually back. Yep. The DEA's becoming badass again, so to speak. And that feels good to see that, because, they had their hands tied for a long time. But yeah, so I left there. I went into contracting work in Afghanistan. And it's funny because my drug enforcement background was what got me to a national commander position within 3 months. So I got there, didn't know a whole lot about Afghanistan, other than I've quickly figured out that all the funding for Al-Qaeda and the Taliban came from the opium. And 95% of the world got their opium from Afghanistan at that time, which funded terrorist networks around the world. And the opium, the poppy eradication program, the PEP program, was one of the programs that we were involved with. I ran 3 national programs. I set up I was asked to set up with my team of 144 Americans to set up a national SWAT and riot team. So we built up a 5,000 man team that went across the entire country, and we did poppy eradication on top of interdiction, on top of crowd control, responding to violent incidents involving more the Taliban. And I always tell people the difference in Al Qaeda and the Taliban is this: Al Qaeda was the masterminds behind the scenes. And when I was there in Afghanistan, I went there in 07, left late in 09. It was the Taliban were the street fighters. Now, since we retreated, in my personal opinion, from Afghanistan, withdrew rather quickly with $90 billion in weapons left behind and technologies. Now the Taliban is probably one of the largest terrorist networks in the world, and the most well-funded, because then we found out recently that over 40, I forget, don't quote me the amount, a lot of money was being sent to the Taliban under the Biden administration. And that's upsetting, a guy who spent years there and saw a lot of lives lost. And I just feel like we lost that. Those people were cruel, and they beat women, killed women. They molested boys, children. It was just horrific what we saw there, and to be in that atmosphere. But getting back to my point is, all the years undercover helped me to get the top tier position in a leadership role. And even Afghanistan, and then same thing happened in Haiti. 10% of all U.S. cocaine comes through Haiti as a transshipment point from Colombia, South America. So there's a drug nexus there. Go to Liberia, the Nigerian cartels control all the things there. So everything has a drug nexus, and having that narcotics enforcement background and the understanding of the inner workings of drug traffickers really has given me a leg up and gotten me some of these top tier leadership roles. And I tell people, learn drug enforcement. Become a narcotics investigator at a minimum, or study it and go to schools. If you're going to work undercover, great, because you're going to have a newfound respect for what actually takes place. But it will help you become a better overall officer if you spend just a little bit of time working narcotics.
Absolutely. Let me ask you this. If you were in Liberia, you're probably familiar with Boko Haram in Nigeria.
Yeah.
Are they are they in the criminal activity just like the Taliban is in Afghanistan?
Of course. So it's funny you say that. So I before I took my second chief of police position, I was named the national project manager over a project in the nation of Nigeria, where we were going to, it's called Transitional Police Unit. We were going to take the army, who was going in and trying to do a good job to rid the northern part of Nigeria from Boko Haram and ISIS influence, but they were doing it from airstrikes and other methods that weren't really conducive with winning over the hearts and minds of people. And it was converting some people over to terrorists. And so we were going to go in and transition some of those people into like a community policing mindset, but also teach them tactics, which is kind of cool, at the same time. So I set up the mission there involving Boko Haram and ISIS. And I ended up taking the chief of police position, $100,000 pay cut, and stayed at home after setting up the mission. It's still active. Another company took it over through the Department of State. But I would say that all these terrorist networks around the world either are involved in human trafficking, drug trafficking, or some other organized crime, because they don't get funded through any other means by other than criminal. So if we don't go after these major crimes, we're never going to curtail terrorist networks. They have to have their funding supplied somewhere, because you don't get paid just to blow people up or suicide bomb. And then you're never going to change the ideology of somebody who believes that they're going to get 72 virgins in heaven if they blow themselves up and kill the infidel. You're not going to change that mindset, but you can stop them from getting brainwashed before they got to, at least. For example, if you're a poverty-stricken nation, let's take Haiti, okay, and a mosque is built in a far-off area that's remote, that you have to drive jeeps through riverbeds and everything. There's no grocery stores. People don't eat hardly. There's nothing there for them. And you build a mosque there, and you say, hey, come to my mosque and let's study the Quran. Let's study it. And I'm going to teach you about that. And I'm also going to give you 3 meals a day while you're there. So you're poor. You don't get to eat unless you go there. So you go there every day. And that's the opportunity for some of the extremists. Not all Muslims are extreme. Don't misunderstand that. But that's the opportunity for the extremist side, the terrorist side, to embed something in their brains against the infidel. And you're brainwashing someone into believing that, during Ramadan, I'm gonna blow myself up. So not only do I get passage to 72 virgins, but my whole family or several family members do also. That if we can stop them from getting indoctrinated into that extremist mindset, that's where we'll win. And that's why U.S. Department of State International Narcotics does missions all around the world. And a lot of people don't understand, why are we contributing? Why are we giving money to these countries? To be honest, to teach them diplomatic policing, to teach them human rights, to have a footprint on what they're doing. Because if we don't do it, the terrorist nations will.
Yeah.
And they will put their mindset and their stamp on it. And then we have an enemy nation that's developed that we can't control at all. It's not about control from a negative perspective. It's about control from a human rights perspective. And I think that's where it's very important, these international policing missions that we do through the U.S. Department of State.
Well, and you go back and think, countries like Mexico, Haiti, places where there was never really a strong central government, if there's not that government influence to give those basic services, create jobs, make sure the people are fed, stuff like that. These radical terrorist organizations, criminal cartels, stuff like that, they will come in and fill those voids.
Yeah.
And then you're right. Their allegiance does lie to them because they're the ones taking care of those services that the government should be doing.
Yeah.
And then you're right. That's the battle. And then we have these pariah states that, are built because the government originally never took care of their people.
Yeah. And that's what I remember seeing in Afghanistan, Haiti, Liberia, a handicapped person, especially in Haiti. After the 2010 earthquake, they had over 1 million people homeless. After that, they said it killed 250,000. They say the numbers double that, but they don't have birth certificates. They don't have all these records that we have in the United States. So human trafficking went through the roof. You got all these people that are in poverty, and you got a nation in need. And then you have people that are money hungry, that want to come in and say, we'll help you. We'll set up all these businesses. And then they set them up for like a year, and then they disappear, and they take all the money. And then, the nation's, hurting, and they can't come back from it. We talked about this briefly. Haiti was the first freed slave nation.
Yep.
And where the slaves revolted in the early 1800s against the French rule, and some of the plantation owners in Haiti, which the slaves outnumbered the plantation owners. They fled to America and got with the slave owners in America. It was like, hey, you better be careful, because if you mistreat your slaves, basically they could revolt against you. And I believe it was the Quakers and slave owners got together and they passed, I forget the name of the treaty. I wish I could remember off the top of my head. They wrote something up where they allowed for a percentage of the African slaves in America to be sent back to Africa every single year. Well, when they would send them back to Africa, they landed in Cote d'Ivoire, which is the Ivory Coast, which borders Liberia. Well, they migrated down to Liberia on the western portion of Africa. And when they got there, what's the first thing they did? They enslaved the indigenous people, because that's all they knew was slavery. They were born into slavery, and they thought that was proper and right and the correct thing to do. We're not going to be the enslaved. We're going to, we're not going to be the people that are doing the work. We're going to enslave the local people. So they did that. Eventually they started to figure this out and started to marry the indigenous people and had relationship building. And they got away from that rather quickly, thank God. But they adopted a constitution similar to the U.S. Constitution. They have a flag in Liberia that looks identical to the United States flag. Instead of 50 stars, they got one big white star, but stars and stripes, everything it's there. And the whole Constitution there and all the justice system is set up and it mimics the United States. So when I was there for 2 years, I was selected to be the senior law enforcement advisor there, and I was assigned to be the senior advisor to the inspector general over the entire national police force. He was appointed by the president. He was a new inspector general, and he hand selected me out of the senior advisors, and I got lucky, and had a great relationship with him, and we did a lot of great things there. And I believe he was one of the longest standing, if not the longest standing inspector general in the history of that country. And then obviously COVID hit, and I got laid off with everybody else and got sent home.
Right.
But these are nations that have evolved, but Liberia is little America in Africa. It's amazing. I lived in Monrovia, named after President Monroe. I listened to Greenville, South Carolina, a radio station, Bob Jones radio station, I believe it was Bob Jones University, a Christian radio station, while I'm in Monrovia, Liberia.
Wow.
And it was just like, wow, man. And the people, they speak English, although they speak so quickly, sometimes it's hard to determine that it's actually English, but they speak English, and they were such kind people. They loved Americans. Well, let me go back to Haiti. Haiti's under the French justice system. To me, it was very confusing. The courts were set up to where the judges did investigations instead of the police at first. And it was like a coordinated investigation. If you didn't have money to have the judge come to your house, you weren't going to get things investigated quickly. And it was just set up for some level of failure. And then there's a lot of history, and we talked about this in Haiti too, is the French, in order to recognize them as a sovereign nation, they had to pay back debt to the French in the amount of billions of dollars. And that's really crippled the Haitians over the years. There's a lot of debate about that, and I don't want to get into that, but I mean, it's rather interesting how, I'm doing these police missions, but they're all tied together. And there's a drug nexus, and there's a poverty nexus, and there's so many other factors. But I truly believe, Americans, especially American law enforcement officers, are perceived as the elite around the world. And people can say whatever they want in the United States and get on social media and talk about us, but we are the best of the best. There's nobody better than us. There's other nations that are phenomenal, but we're the best overall. Yep. And people want to be like us. And when you get to go to these nations, they show you such a level of respect like you've never seen in the United States. It makes it, a mission that's meaningful and something that you felt like you accomplished so much in a short period of time. Me personally going over there, having a background as a chief of police, and I didn't even get into this yet, but, I fought corruption as a chief of police. I lost my job. I was fired early my first round as chief of police because I refused to overlook some criminal and ethical violations when I was point blank asked to do so.
Right.
It resulted in a 14-month legal battle. I got my job back. They rescinded my termination when they investigated it, determined I was a whistleblower, brought me back with full back pay. I came in that window. We went from number 28 to number 1 safest city. We did the community programs, the 287% increase in drug arrests, like I said earlier. But all that was after a massive battle. To get my position back. And it resulted in the mayor getting indicted, removed from office by the governor, who was Nikki Haley at the time. And he was convicted of 2 of 3 charges against crimes against moral turpitude, can never hold public office ever again. Then the head of investigations, that was prior to my time as chief, was indicted for something that I was blowing the whistle on a cold case murder and rape, where he pled guilty to tampering with evidence to cover up a suspect. That was a white suspect in a racially motivated rape and murder. And I ran into all that as a chief, but I was steadfast. I stood my ground. But a lot of people looked at me as like, who is this guy? Like, he comes in here and all of a sudden there's chaos. The chaos was there. Nobody was willing to take a stand. And I was the one that was willing to take that stand. So therefore, they didn't know if I was a problem or a solution. There's still people to this day, despite the indictments and everything that happened, that blame me, say, oh, man, his leadership caused this chaos. In actuality, I was the one who actually took the stand and got the ball rolling. And that's something that personally I'm proud of, but it gave me a black eye in my career. And it's been something that I've had to explain on every single security clearance thereafter. And it's something every time you have to fill out a job application. Have you ever been terminated? Yes. Have you ever been suspended 30 days or suspended? Yes. Why did you get suspended? I did a human trafficking sting, and they said I made the town look like it had a human trafficking problem. That's not really a reason. Well, that's what they told me, and they had no other reason in writing. So these are things that, as a leader, you're going to encounter political, people who do not want you to expose what's really going on in the community. And my message to current leaders, future leaders, is step up. If we approach this as a team and we all go after it, they can't get rid of all of us. But if one guy like myself steps in less than 1% by themselves, you're going to get picked off one at a time. But we have yet to, as law enforcement, step up as a group where the 99% or 90% are the ones who are at the top tier. Like, no, I don't care if you're a politician. You hired me as a police expert, as the chief of police, and I'm going to enforce the law. I'm not going to put on my blinders voluntarily, like you're kind of asking me to do, so I can say that I'm not corrupt, but I'm just looking the other way. No, we got to stop that as law enforcement leaders. We have to take it to another level. And I think the time is now. And I hope that's what you and I are both members of a different breed, ADB Nation, the training school, and I teach Undercover school with them, but we have so many instructors that teach all different areas from leadership to money laundering to mental health to you name it, patrol tactics. There's so much out there, and I've never seen anything like it. And it is the mindset that I just spoke about. And that was what made me go towards them. I could have gone out on my own and done many different things, but I was like, I want to train with those guys. I want to be a part of that movement because I believe as a group, that's how we make change, not as individuals getting picked off one at a time.
It's funny you say that. My dad, when he was sheriff, went through a legal deal. Same thing, taking on a bunch of corruption. And, the county commissioners at the time, there just wasn't a pushback like to fight that change.
Yeah.
And, he was the one fighting that change. And like people drug his name through the mud because he was the one that wanted to push back. And, now 10, 12 years later, the people that replaced him, they're going through the same thing because, those alliances changes and now people, you know what I'm saying? And
no, absolutely. So number one, I commend your dad. We need guys like that and girls like that or whatever in law enforcement in general. We need leaders like that. I always say this, like it's a little different. A sheriff has a lot more ability to make that impact. They're elected by the people. Yep. Therefore, they answer to the people. They don't answer to politicians.
Yep.
Although they are politicians, some of them more than others. They're lawmen and women ultimately. Yep. And they are guaranteed 4-year terms in order to deal with this and not be removed. Well, as a chief of police, you're not guaranteed tomorrow. No. So as the chief of police, I had to have a master's degree and all this experience, but our sheriff had to be elected.
Yep.
So doesn't mean they're worse or better. What it means is sheriffs can do a lot more and have such a massive impact with the positive, proper leadership. A chief, if you step up like I've done, your head's on the chopping block. And I've done it twice. And both times it's cost me dearly. But I'm not willing to, stop or turn the other cheek on bad officers or corrupt officers or them committing crimes. I'm going to deal with it. I'm not willing, to stop going after pedophiles and human trafficking because it makes the town look like it has a human trafficking problem. Every town has a problem. It's whether or not we're aggressively going after it. And I believe in full transparency. But as a chief, it's rather difficult. And I commend the chiefs that do it. I frown upon those that are willing to just like, we don't really want to deal with that. It's too much. There's a lot of negativity that comes with that. That's our job. That's what we do. So I appreciate, how sheriffs have that ability is what I'm getting at and guaranteed their 4 years. I wish chiefs were elected as well, where we would have a guaranteed term where we could go in and make the proper changes and not at a whim. Literally everything can be going great in a community. And all of a sudden you arrest too many pedophiles and some politician thinks that, they're close to getting me or close to getting one of my friends. So therefore I'm going to tell him to stop. And if he doesn't stop, he's gone.
Yeah,
That
and
happens.
just so for people who aren't familiar with it, most chiefs of police in the United States are at will employees, and so like you
Yes,
said, they can come in tomorrow and say, "Hey, your service is no longer needed. Appreciate it."
absolutely. And it happens. The chiefs that I know, just from being part of the South Carolina Police Chiefs Association, going to IACP and things like that, chiefs that I know, quite a few of the great ones, almost all the great ones, have had that happen to them. In some way, shape, or form, a chief's going to have some baggage on their resume, and if they don't, I question, did they ever take a stand genuinely on anything?
Yep,
Because you work for, I worked for 7 politicians, and they all had input and they all had a vote. And at
yep,
any moment, if you shift a 4-3, 4 people say we don't want them, you're gone.
yep,
And that's the way it works. And
yep.
and they can shift overnight and bring you back. It's just a level of uncertainty that we shouldn't put our top tier law enforcement leaders under. We should give them contracts. We should make sure the chiefs are protected, because a protected chief can protect their people when they're in the right.
Yeah,
People need to know that the chief's going to be there and there's some stability. They don't need to be scared because that's a chief that has my back. He's probably going to lose his job. And that's the mindset now of law enforcement. If the chief takes a stand, they're gone.
yep.
That's how it is in modern law enforcement, especially in the United States or anywhere in the world almost.
There is four, I think it's four, maybe five police agencies in Oklahoma that still have a municipality that elects their chief.
Wow.
And they're all smaller. I'd say smaller towns,
Okay.
maybe 10,000 or under for the most part.
Okay.
My hometown and the first agency I worked at there is one of the last few. And it. You're right. I mean, when you're elected and you got that 4 years guaranteed or whatever your term may be, um, you can jump in there and change more things, because if you're
Yeah.
appointed, there's a lot of leaders out there that won't take that jump. And like you said, I question and if they ever, had the drive to actually do change,
Yeah.
because they're afraid of, well, I'm going to lose my job, you
Yep.
know? And
I always say this: if you make a decision as the top cop in an agency, and you make most or all or any decision based upon keeping your job instead of what's the right thing to do, you need to get the hell out.
yep,
You need to go on and work somewhere else, because we have to have people in those positions that are steadfast, are constitutionalists, will follow the law to the T. But also, you got to take situations in every situation in consideration of what was the intent of the officer when whatever happened happened. What was the intent of the person? Not from a criminal perspective, but when an officer fails at something or makes a mistake, did they intend to make that mistake? Probably not. And if they had good intentions, is it just a remedial training situation, or are you going to crucify them, throw them under the bus so you can take the heat off yourself? That's weak leadership.
yep.
We need to get away from that as law enforcement.
Oh, wholeheartedly. I think I had a very bad experience with a supervisor when I was a younger cop, and I think that's why I don't know if I've told you this. I'm working on my doctorate in leadership right now.
Yeah,
I've
I
got about
saw
a year
that.
left,
It's awesome.
and I think that's where my interest in leadership came from, was because I had such a negative experience that I told myself I never want to be that guy.
Absolutely.
And that's what I was having a discussion with somebody the other day. Is like, in today's environment, especially on the patrol level, if you're a corporal, sergeant, and you've got 4 or 5 people underneath you, the days of my way or the highway are over. Like,
Yeah, absolutely.
you have to manage different personalities, different types of drive. You have to be a true leader to be successful on a shift,
Yeah.
and that goes all the way up the chain. And that starts with the chief, sheriff, whoever it may be, that's willing to take a stand and say, I'm here to be a leader for my people.
Yeah. I agree. The younger generation, they want to know why, because they truly want to understand, and it has nothing to do with like being defiant. But that's a hard pill for the older generation who blindly, sir, yes, sir. When you're given an order, it's like, sir, yes, sir, because sergeant told me to. That was why'd you do that? Sergeant said to. Now this generation wants to know why, and it needs to be explained to them. And there's a positive side to that, because during that explanation of why, sometimes you start to question, why you're giving them this order,
Yep.
and is it the best option? And sometimes open discussions. I think as a leader, like I always say, my command staff, I didn't want a bunch of yes people, a bunch of yes men and women on my command staff. I wanted people that would, in private, be respectful, call me the hell out. And I wanted that because if I have everyone on my command staff like, yeah, Chief, you're the best, man. This is great, Chief. I'm only as good as me. But if I have a whole command staff, and I had some that were in total opposition with a lot of things I thought were great ideas, but I appreciated that sometimes because it made me always think the other perspective. But I loved it when you had that occasional person that would be like, yeah, Chief, I support you on everything, but that's not a good idea.
Yep.
And this is why that's not a good idea. And if you want to go down that route, maybe think about doing it this way. Wow. That's what a leadership team should be doing instead of, yeah, we'll do that because Chief said.
Echo chambers are never successful.
No, not at all, man. It just sets you up for failure. But that's what a lot of these weak leaders want. They want everybody around them to be less than them so they're not threatened by them. They don't feel like they won't hire better. I hired people that were way smarter than me. I hired people that were experts in certain areas, and they were way better than me. I wasn't the smartest guy, but I was smart enough to realize surround yourself with really hard workers, really good people, really people with a good heart and intentions. You'll have a phenomenal agency, and it'll reflect in your crime rates.
Well, it's funny you say that, and that's why on the ADB forum the other day, I made the joke. I'm jokingly calling everybody out.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I don't want it to get to the point that where we are an echo chamber in there.
I agree. I think that was brilliant. You did it, you did it lightheartedly, but there's an element of truth behind it. Like, guys, we're a brotherhood and a sisterhood. Let's, you say you're going to do this, let's do it.
Yep.
Let's be together on this one right here. Let's have these dialogues right here because these are healthy. I mean, I could talk for days on tons of subjects, but I enjoy talking with people, and hearing different perspectives. And in the end, most of what we want is the same thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I hope no one, everybody took that as me. I would expect the same thing. Like, because life happens, we forget. Like, hey, if I say I'm going to do something and I forget, hey, Brent, remember you're supposed to give me a call and like work on that with me? Like, I would expect the same thing.
Exactly.
It's nothing personal. It's like, hey, it's a little friendly jab. Like, hey, like, remember that? Like, we got to get this done. And so let me ask you this. You've got so much experience as a bush shaker. How did you decide now it's time to jump into leadership?
I'll tell you, man, I did not want to be a leader. When I was working narcotics or working patrol, I loved it. Took care of myself, took care of what was around me. I felt like I want to be the best at this. When I worked undercover, I studied it. I lived it. I breathed it. It was part of me. I was submersed in it 24/7. It was my love, my passion. Then I ran into some incompetent leaders, and it frustrated me so much with how they hindered the growth of their people, including me. And I was like, you know what? Screw this. I'm not going to allow these people to be my boss. I'm going to put in, I'm going to get promoted, and I'm going to be the supervisor. And I'm going to run it according to how I would have wanted it run when I was the boots on the ground person that was doing all the work. And that's what got me in. I remember my first was the DEA when I was I was an FTO early on in my career, things like that. But my first big thing, I was a special agent with DEA. We had a huge gang problem in Western Kansas. A lot of drive-by shootings. The Wild West town of Dodge City, Kansas was still the Wild West. It was just Mexican gangs and cartels and stuff. And so I wrote a proposal. Didn't think it would be approved to form a task force. It ended up being called Go Soldiers Task Force. Our slogan was when the lights go out, we come out. It was an after-hours part-time task force. We covered 36 counties. We had every county give somebody to the task force. In our first 12 hours, we made 96 arrests. Wow. And it's funny. That was phenomenal. I think it was like 26 of those were adopted like major federal cases. And it was a big deal. We're going after the gangbangers pretty hardcore. But the part that I didn't expect was politics. Like, I'm thinking these sheriffs are going to be happy, and I'm not going to name any sheriffs, but we overcrowded the jail. And all of a sudden it went from, clean up my community from these gangbangers to, I don't have enough beds.
Slow down.
Why are you arresting so many people? So it's like damn. So the Department of Justice approved it quickly, and I was kind of in shock how quickly they approved it, and they really supported it. They grasped it and said go. And I did that, and I got burned out, and I told you the reasons I left the DEA, and then I went overseas. I walked into Afghanistan. This is my first full-time major leadership role. I walked into Afghanistan, and they had about 1,000 men on the National SWAT and Riot Team called ANCOP, Afghan National Civil Order Police. That was the name of the program. And it was failing. And they wanted to build it up to 5,000 capacity. So during that time I got there, I was a tactical rifle patrol instructor for 3 months. I did that, and then they said, hey, we need a national commander. So my buddy's like, dude, put in, man. You come from the DEA, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, man, I'll put in. But I'm 30 years old, man. They're not gonna hire me. Right. You know what I'm saying? They got all these guys with 20, 30 years experience, and sure enough, they hired me because of my DEA drug enforcement experience and the Taliban and poppy eradication, all that stuff. And I got that high level position. But let me tell you, I worked 16 hours a day, every single day, 7 days a week when I was there. I actually put 2 recliners in my room where I was doing counseling at night, because when you deploy overseas on a police mission, if you have problems at home, when you go overseas, they're tenfold. I had guys calling home and their wife's boyfriend answers the phone. Yep. What do you think that does? And they're, 24-hour flight away.
Yep.
You want to talk about suicidal or wanting to go home and do harm to somebody. These are all factors. And then they're running into problems. I had one guy, he saved all this money for a year. He's about to go home, and his wife took off with her boyfriend and took all his money out of the accounts and wiped them clean. And it was like, dude, I almost died several times here, and I'm sacrificing. So here I am. I'm counseling them. And it just so happened right next door to me, Dr. Paul Zizel, he was a psychologist for DynCorp International on our Department of State mission. He was phenomenal. So he was always like, man, keep going. You're doing a good job, encouraging and stuff. And I realized as a commander, as a top guy, I wasn't really supervising them on their job. I was supporting them in their mission of life in general. I was there to hey man, how's your wife? How are your kids? Man, have you saved up that money so you can go back home and pay for your kids' college? That's what I was doing. And that's what leadership is. It's not about me micromanaging how you're doing your traffic. So unless I'm seeing safety violations and stuff like that, but it's more about taking care of your people and actually genuinely showing them that you give a damn, that you care. Management by walking around, the old saying, walking around, asking them how they're doing, not to spy on them, but walking in the squad room and seeing that 2 out of the 3 or 4 computers in there are down. And then turn around and say, hey guys, I'm sorry. I'll fix that. That's my failure as a leader. I didn't catch this sooner. It's been broken for 2 weeks and I didn't catch it. So stuff like that. And then in a leadership role, I remember forming, it was called EAC, Employee Action Committee. And we formed that, and every month, one representative from every single patrol shift, from records to forensics to any other division within a department, dispatch, communications, all had an opportunity to send one representative with no rank in a meeting with me once a month. And they had to bring me at least 3 problems that they were dealing with and 3 solutions. And some of them brought more problems, especially at first. At first it was hard because I was overwhelmed with the number of problems, but I had no rank in the room. My chief stars or Eagles didn't matter. It was all about that line of communication. I had 30 days to get them an answer, and I had to do it to my whole entire department in our monthly meetings. I had to tell them what the problem was presented and what the solution is or what's going to happen. And it really held my feet to the fire. Now, the first 6 months, I was overwhelmed with a lot of work. But after that 6 months, I barely had any problems coming to me because they were bringing them to me on a steady basis, and I was addressing them, and they weren't the same problem that was lingering. I was learning that there was a problem in my chain of command from the road officer going up through the corporal, the sergeant, the lieutenant, the captain, the major, all the way up. It was getting stopped at the lieutenant level. It wasn't ever reaching the command staff level. And when I opened up that line of communication direct to the top, it really, gave me a newfound respect for, never, ever, ever, ever forgetting, the boots on the ground people, because they're the ones who make this agency run and operate. So take care of them. And we did.
Absolutely. And I think you hit on a great point. Far too often things die at the mid management level that never get up there. And so you get that echo chamber from your mid level supervisor saying, "Oh, everything's great, chief." And when in reality, it's not. And then they get blindsided. And it's not really fair to them because they think everything's going smoothly. And
Yeah.
then, they're hit with, 67 different things all at once. And you're like,
Yeah.
it's not really fair to the chief. But, that's something we as trainers have to work on and train the next generation to not fail where others before us have failed.
Yeah. No. So I came in both agencies as the chief of police as an outside hire.
Mm-hmm.
So here's my philosophy on it. It's right or wrong. I believe if an agency is running very well, and they have internal candidates that are exceptional, and they're in the direction that they want it to go, they don't want to hardly change anything, hire internally. But if you have a lack of leadership in the agency, and the agency is not really doing what you expect from them, and they don't have good community relationships and things like that, look outside. Give the internal candidates the opportunity. But to be honest with you, if you're in a top tier command staff position, like captains and above, depending upon the size of the agency, you're part of the problem. If it's not being fixed, you're part of the problem. And you can't just think like I see a lot of agencies doing this DEI hiring from a major metropolitan who had colossal. Their agency was bad at morale. They couldn't staff fully. There were a lot of issues, and they brought them. Oh, they were a chief here, so we're going to bring them over here, and they're going to be better. They're not. If they suck there, they're going to suck here. Reality is if a chief can't staff an agency, the leadership is a problem. People leave leadership, not agencies. And for me, I both agencies I walked in 35% understaffed. Within 6 months, 100% staff with a waiting list of people, both agencies. When I left, boom. And it wasn't because I left slowly. It wasn't because I didn't set things in place. I left because I was forced to leave because I took a stand ethically on some either crimes or going after certain types of people or dirty officers. So if you're a leader and you set that up and you're able to slowly transition out, it should stay stable. But if you pull a good leader out, you yank them out and put somebody in that's a yes man or yes woman, the agency is going to crumble.
Yep.
They're going to suffer because people work for leaders. They don't work for agencies.
Wholeheartedly agree. I'm actually working on my coaching certification right now, like live career. But it's funny. It's funny you mentioned that. And it's kind of the same way in communication. It's actually something I struggle with coming from a law enforcement background is coach the problem, not the person.
Yeah.
Solve the problem instead of solve. I might tell you that I hate Mexican food.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, then the underlying problem, well, I hate it because, it's at the busiest intersection in town. Just using a random example.
Yeah.
But,
oh, yeah.
It's the same way in leadership. Like, if you don't solve your problem, you're still going to have a problem. It doesn't matter who's your top guy. That problem still will be there.
Yeah, I agree. That's one of the reasons that I wrote one of my books. I got 8 books out. One of my books is called Leadership Under Fire, and it's about real life stories of some of the trials and tribulations in leadership positions, especially as a 2-time chief of police, and then internationally and things that I encountered. And it gives some lessons and some pointers to people on some things to do to avoid some of the pitfalls that I ran into and how to navigate some of those waters. And I wrote it as almost like it's a leadership book, but it's a workbook within. If you want to, do the reflective prompts at the end and follow that, it really is a whole lesson. Then I just recently, nobody knows this. You're the first person I'm actually telling. So I have another book called The Great Divider in Chief, and it's actually I just got it back today. The cover and everything on it, and it talks about how leadership eroded trust in law enforcement. And so the top leadership, presidential level, really has a lot of influence on how people perceive police. For example, a little example, the beer summit, President Obama, when the black professor was arrested trying to get into his own house.
Yep.
You know, when officers received a call that there was a black male on a porch trying to breach the door, and they got there and he was grossly intoxicated. He was arrested. It was a big to-do. It was a white officer and a black suspect. And Obama called the beer summit in the gardens at the White House. And then he deemed all law enforcement officers are undertrained and systemically racist. Wow. You just brought us back 50 years. You cannot say those things when you're in a top tier leadership role. Where there's some things that could have been done differently, of course. We can always get better as law enforcement. But as top tier leadership, your words have impact. And that's what the book is. It goes into every single controversial incident that occurred in law enforcement in the last 25 years. It's over 40 chapters. I got over 250 references throughout the entire book. It was an intense undertaking to put this thing together. It'll be out soon. It's one of those where it's actually a leadership book. So each chapter has a reflective prompt at the end about leadership. And it goes anywhere from, systemic racism to different types of situations that we've encountered and gaining public trust or losing public trust. And man, I don't want to put too much out there, but it's very intense. And then I have my other books that I wrote. I wrote a book on human trafficking called Shattered Chains. I wrote a book called Deep Cover. That's not for the public. That's straight up 550-page manual on how to work deep undercover, how to overcome and get into any situation from infiltrating drug cartels to gangs to buying drugs to doing human trafficking stings. It tells you the roadmap for everything. So I will not release that to the public. And then my first book series I wrote was A Narc's Tale. It was about my 6 years working undercover at the city, the county, and the federal level. And it tells basically my life story of getting into law enforcement in the first book, all the trials and tribulations from getting robbed in my first undercover deal to all the mistakes that I made because I never received training until 2 years into undercover. Then once I got trained, all of a sudden I'm buying kilos, automatic weapons, doing everything because I didn't know what I didn't know. And then all of a sudden I'm doing murders for hire and getting other detectives to bring cases to me because I didn't know what I didn't know. So that's where me and you are on the same page. Like training is everything, education, training. And I believe if you invest in your people, they'll stay longer. They feel like, oh, I'm an integral part of this. They see something in me for the future. They're putting money into me. So therefore, I'm going to be a long-term member of this organization because they're investing in me for training. Leaders need to know that. Invest in your people. Put money into training. If your budget sucks, increase it. You need to figure out a way to pull from somewhere else to put into training. Because if you don't invest in training, your people will leave. Because they don't feel like you care about them.
I love that. That's encapsulated perfectly. That's a cherry on top. I love that. Now, let me, and I'm going to oversimplify this, and you'll probably agree to this. If you break down leadership to the simplest form, the best thing I could say about leadership is words matter. How you say them, how who you deliver it to. You got to remember that, like, at the end of the day, you're talking to a person and not an inanimate object, like, that just wears a uniform. Like, you're talking to a person.
Yes. And what you said how you say it.
Yep.
Because you can say the same sentence 2 different ways, and it's going to come across 2 different ways. And it's not like when you go into a new unit. I remember a good buddy of mine, a phenomenal police officer, came over, wanted to come into our vice narcotics unit from another agency. Great workhorse. He would have been a great member. I told him, I said, nobody cares how much you know till they know how much you care. I said, come in here and support everybody initially. Just show them you're a team player. You're a team player. Don't make any of your own cases. Support everybody else as a secondary. Anything you got to do to show that you're part of the team. He didn't do that. He got blackballed internally, and they forced him out. Although he'd have been a great member, but he just couldn't shut that down. I'm like, dude, that's leadership. You have to have the ability to adapt. I was raised, by an enlisted United States Marine, 22 years. I was a military brat. I moved every 4 years. I learned to overcome and adapt. I believe that background helped me out. You were raised by a sheriff,
Mm-hmm.
getting politically attacked constantly, thick skin, the ability to look past emotions. That made you into the leader you are today, and it's going to mold you into an even greater leader because you had your father as that role model, and having that, that's a big deal. My father demonstrated ethically, work ethic, all those different things. My mom was kindness.
Yep.
So I have both worlds. So I feel blessed. Not everybody has that, but truly, there's no excuse for me not to be successful if I have all these great role models. And if you don't have the great role models, find them. There are people like me. I mentor. I can't even count how many people on both hands that I actually mentor. And I don't do it for anything other than I love this profession. I want to see others get into it. I'm helping a couple people right now write books. And the reason I'm doing it is because I want more law enforcement to be perceived as who they are. We're very intelligent people. We're people who can put the muscle on you if you need to, but we know what we're doing. We're intellectual. We study. You're getting your doctorate. I have my master's degree. These are things I've written 9 books now coming up. This is how we need to be perceived in order to be deemed professional.
Yep.
Because a lot of times as law enforcement, we're looked at, big jacked up dudes, tough guys, skull crushers, that we can be that when we need to be. We'll do bad things to bad people within the scope of the law if we need to. But in reality, that's a small percentage of what we do. Most of it is strategic, crime strategies, community programs, catering to people. Like I remember watching one of your videos where you talked about being a PIO and the importance of sending out the right message to the people, because the people think we're just sitting around doing nothing a lot of times. Perception is reality. Yep. We have to do a better job as law enforcement at putting it out there. My last chief position, I saw when I walked in, I saw they were underutilizing social media. They didn't have a consistent PIO that was sending a consistent message. So we increased our social media presence and followers over 400% in about a year and a half. And we have more people following us than citizens in the community. So if that didn't say anything, it was just like, wow. And then all of a sudden I'm gone. They haven't even increased it 1% since I left, and it's been over a year. Yep. They're not telling you anything. You're not knowing when I put the good, the bad. It didn't matter. I put the community programs. I put the arrest. I wasn't trying to hide that we had crime. I wanted to be 100% transparent. So when I went and asked for money from the citizens, or I went and asked for help, they realized we have a problem in that area, a drug problem or auto breakings or whatever it is. I wasn't trying to hide it. You got too many chiefs now that want to, we don't want to say we had 60 auto breakings and all the cars were unlocked because it looks like we weren't patrolling. No, reality is these things happen. And the more eyes and ears we have out there looking out for us because we communicated with them, the higher the probability we're going to bust them.
Yep.
So why not partner with 20, 50, 100,000 citizens instead of relying on 50 to 500 officers to do it all?
It's funny, and I'm going to throw a cheap plug out here for proactive policing because I know you'll back this up.
Yeah, no doubt.
You hit on a key point. A lot of chiefs, sheriffs, whoever, decision makers want to gloss over the fact that crime happens in their town.
Absolutely.
Citizens know it happens. They want to know how you're going to combat that.
Amen.
Getting that message out there. But also they want to see your guys, girls, being proactive in the neighborhoods at 3, 4 o'clock in the morning. Hey, if there's a car in there that's creeping around, or hey, there's a car backed up with somebody sitting in it at 4 o'clock in the morning, get out, check them.
Yes.
Because I don't know how much drugs, guns, stolen cars I've gotten like that.
Man.
And then the PIO in me says, let's get that message out there because the people want to see that.
Absolutely. You're speaking my language, brother, because I have a whole chapter devoted to reactive versus proactive leadership. And I preach it the whole entire book. Obviously, integrity is my number one thing. If you don't have that, the basis, you don't have anything as a leader. But it's easy to be reactive. You have an element of law enforcement that's always going to be reactive because you have 911 calls. But there's a lot of law enforcement that can be proactively done. But what does that take? It takes work. and it takes something to motivate your people, to keep them motivated. There's a percentage of officers that will undoubtedly be your workhorses. You don't have to motivate them. You don't have to do a damn thing. That's like a small percentage. Then you got about 80% that kind of follow with the flow of the organization. Those are the ones that you really need to concentrate on. They need that proper motivation. What's your motivation? How are you motivating your officers? Do you recognize great police work? Or do you put out too many certificates? Oh, great job. I'm giving one out every 2 days. Is it meaningful? Does it have an impact? Are you pushing out there? Some people say, oh, I don't need the recognition. Undoubtedly, we don't do it for the recognition, but it feels damn good when you get it.
Yep.
You want to be recognized because you're putting in that extra effort. Did you stay over 4 hours digging through this search warrant, making sure that we dot all our I's, crossed all our T's, or the extra time to process the evidence after the search warrant? Fingerprints, DNA. Did you sign off to send it to the lab and do all that extra stuff? Even if you don't think you're going to get anything, to say you dotted all the I's, crossed all the T's. Proactive leadership takes work. And that's why a lot of weak leaders and lazy, complacent leaders don't want to do it. They just want to be retired on duty. I made it to chief. I'm in the top position. I don't want anybody to mess that up. I don't want to make it look like we're doing too much or too little. We'll respond to crime when we need to. But if we do too much, then they might start questioning, do we have a crime problem? That's the mindset of some of these people. Man, my book is all about that. Leadership Under Fire. It goes into that. It dives deep into it. It's funny because today I just had it out. It came out in Audible today. Leadership Under Fire. It was under Google Play, but I put it under Audible because it's easier to access for people. Right. So you can get it in audio, in ebook like Kindle, or in paperback. And man, it's a game changer, man. I've had so much positive feedback and a lot of chiefs across the nation. And I have some guys internationally from as far as like Sweden, leadership in Swedish National Police that have contacted me, some African nations, especially Liberia, places I've been, and be like, dude, this is on point. This is that book. And then if you're looking for, like we talked about early on, everything has a drug nexus. If you're looking to learn about drug enforcement, A Narc's Tale, my book series, is professionally put into Audible. I played the voice actor to handle everything for me. It is phenomenal. And let me tell you, I had a 30-year narc, 30 years in narcotics, tell me he learned more in my book than he learned in 30 years in narcotics. And I said, bull crap. I said, there ain't no way. He said, let me explain something to you. He goes, I worked as a narcotics investigator. I never worked undercover and never took the time to learn what it entailed and what it was. You open the eyes behind the scenes as far as what these drug deals actually entail beyond, hey, put a body wire on an informant, send them in, bring them out, count the money, make sure the serial numbers match when we do the search warrant, all that kind of stuff. You open my eyes to all the elements, how it mentally affects them, why they did this with their phone, why they did that with their putting the car in somebody else's name, why they did this for their house, how they mask their assets, why they purchased this amount, why they cut it up with this kind of product. Man, it's all in there. It's all in there. You just got to be willing to listen to it. You don't have to read it. You can read it if you want. Most people don't have time. Cops, we don't have time to read. You're on a 12-hour shift. Put it in Audible, play it. I had a guy today call me who was actually playing one of my books. He's like, man, I want to get this on. I don't have time to sit down and read anymore. I said, here, audio copy. Listen to it. You got time in a patrol car. Listen. I used to tell people 2 hours in a patrol car. If you work your ass off, you outwork everybody on your shift.
Listen, I'm a podcast guy through and through, but deep down inside, I'm still old. I'm an old school book guy. I will get me a hard copy of the book.
No, man, I'll send you one.
Hey, and here's the deal. You're 100% right. That's actually, I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but it's called Game of Crimes. It's a retired DEA agent that does the podcast, and he has a lot of stuff on there. And that's how I started kind of getting new ideas and like networking and like meeting people, because I listened to his podcast and picked up on things like you're saying, like, hey, like this did not work well here. Like this is stuff like you should do. Guys, we got 8, 10, 12 hours in the car. Man. Put it on and listen to it. No like even if you don't get post credit for it, that doesn't mean you're not learning.
Yeah, you're going to educate yourself to where you'll be a better officer, and you'll get recognition through your work ethic and the successful cases that you bring, and prosecutions are successful. I mean, that reality is we work for the people. We need to approach it. We need to kind of go back a little bit to back in the days, 30s, 40s, when we were looked at as peacekeepers.
Yep.
Police officers need to approach things with the intentions of keeping the peace. Now, granted, some people come out firing and we're going to shoot back. But if there's an opportunity to de-escalate it, do it. But don't put yourself in harm's way in a deadly force situation by utilizing a less than lethal force by yourself. And that's a controversial thing, a topic we've been discussing in the nation with ADB, and it's been all over online. You had the taser incident with the suspect who was armed. I believe those officers are phenomenal officers. I've talked to some guys that know them personally. It's not to down them by any means. What they saw, what they did was their choice. Use of force is an individual choice. But if we are training and pushing this narrative that you can bring, or it's good to use less than lethal force against a lethal force, then we're putting ourselves in harm's way. We're training our officers to get killed. We have to meet it with equal, at a minimum, normally one step level above in the use of force continuum, but deadly force is the top. So you meet deadly force with at least deadly force. And people have to learn. You don't pull a gun on a cop. You pull a gun on a cop, you get shot. You pull a knife on a cop, you're going to get shot, especially if you're within the reactionary gap and there's nothing, no barriers or anything like that. So these are things we as leaders in law enforcement and trainers, we have to do a better job at talking about these controversial things, and not be afraid of that far left or anti-police person that attacks you for saying that type of stuff. Try and articulate it. Try and have a healthy conversation. Some people you can't have a healthy conversation with. They're so full of hate and they're not open to discussions. But I've had some really good conversations with people who disagree with me. And as a matter of fact, they opened my eyes in a lot of situations. Maybe not change my opinion overall, but it just made me think of things differently. Healthy debates are good. Riots and violent protests are horrible. So healthy debate, peaceful protest, whatever you feel is right.
So I love that. But I've got one question, and it's been bugging me. And I got to ask you the hard-hitting questions. Am I right? 8 books, going on 9. I've never seen somebody pump out articles like you.
So you want to know my secret?
Well,
So I've written all these books, and I can go into any of my books. I got them all on my laptop. I can type in any subject, and I already have an article for it. And I can take that and then summarize it.
That's awesome.
I have my 9th book about to come out, but I have on the back burner already written pretty much for the most part 6 more books. I can pump out books, man. My wife laughs at me because she'll go away for the weekend with work or go to visit family or something like that. And she'll come back and I wrote a book. And so literally I wrote a couple hundred pages in a book. I can type super fast. I don't dictate it. I can fly. And so it's kind of funny. I can do that. Then I'll shelf it for 2 months. And then I'll think hey, I want to talk about that again. And so you get either a writer's block. So I write all the time. I can't even tell you how many gigs of writing that I've put together over the years. So I can pump out some articles, man. You ask me almost any subject. It's not because I'm an expert in every subject. I just do research in those subjects. And I have experienced a lot in almost 27 years, but I have a lot to learn. I feel like one of my positive best qualities is I don't think I know it all. I don't think I'm better than anybody. I'm humble enough to help anybody at any time or realize that I'm wrong sometimes, but I'm a constant student. And I pride myself in that. I want to learn more every single day. I'm hungry for it. I get a natural high off law enforcement leadership. And sometimes I intimidate people because I'll come across when I start to get pumped up, it's like I'm on meth or something.
Yeah.
I'm coming out at you, man. And it's not that I'm trying to be aggressive with you or anything like that. It's just I truly believe in this mission, what we do as law enforcement officers, and we got to constantly be striving to be better. And we got to draw a line on certain things. We're spreading ourselves a little too thin in law enforcement. We're wearing too many hats where we're set up for failure constantly now, because you got to diagnose something in 2 seconds that a doctor couldn't diagnose in 50 years. And then you got to know how to handle it, and you got to resolve that matter so it doesn't escalate. Come on, man. That is ridiculous. But that's what we're doing with our police nowadays. We just put too much on them. And I think as police, we are going to respond to things that nobody else can handle. But we have to have realistic expectations. Let's paint a clear line. Like I said, if it's a deadly force encounter, you're going to get met with deadly force. Point blank. When we respond, we're there to keep the peace. We're also there to protect life and property. We're not going to stand by while you're rioting and burning down a family business of 50 years. It's not going to do it. When you see police being called down, we fail. We have flat out failed. You allow somebody to come in and destroy 50 years worth of a family, blood, sweat, tears, deaths, everything. Come on. What are we doing? Oh, it's just property. No, it isn't just property. That's their life. Mm-hmm. You're allowing it to be destroyed. And if we as police, I see this a lot, and this is something where I've been in well over 500 riots. Okay. We responded to over 500 in Haiti alone. With my units over there, I had 1,670 guys from 11 countries. We had 160-man formed police units. We responded to every single protest and riot, and we had them every day. And they were violent, very violent. And same thing in Afghanistan, all over the place. So I can tell you, I see police officers in the United States not having the backing of their leadership. They're expecting people to get in their face. And the arm's length, if we're not teaching this, man, if you tell somebody, you give them a warning, you get in my personal space, I'm going to take it as an act of aggression, and I'm going to handle the situation. When we stopped doing that, we started failing as police. And it became politicians telling chiefs what to do, and yes, men and women chiefs saying, okay, because I want to keep my job, instead of zero tolerance for that. Peaceful protest, we fully support. The First Amendment right to peacefully assemble, we're all for it. But the second it goes away, it's no longer a peaceful assembly.
Yep.
And we have to respond to that. But we as law enforcement, they preach all this tolerance and all this stuff. Granted, we have to have thick skin, and there's people that run their mouths and stuff like that. But reality is we allow it to escalate by allowing these people to get in the officer's face, to spit on them, to do different things and not make an arrest. And then the 5 guys behind them are like, well, you can do that? So they step up. It's you ever seen that video where somebody starts a movement? They're at this dance, and this one person's dancing all crazy, and all of a sudden the second person join in, then 3 or 4 more join in, then a group joins in, then you got hundreds, and you got thousands of people doing this weird dance. Yep. It starts with one person, a movement. Take that out quickly. Remove that instigator from the scene. That's how you handle those things. We as law enforcement are just flat out failing when it comes to that type of stuff, because we're teaching tolerance for things that are unlawful. It's not peaceful assembly. When you're breaching the peace, when you're blocking people from going somewhere, when you're scaring the hell out of the general public, you can't do those things. People have a right to walk down the sidewalk. They have a right to walk to and from their place of work, to go into their cars. You block a highway, man, we're allowing that as police. I don't give a damn. We shouldn't allow it. And that's where, I always tell people, sometimes, you have these situations where you have 3 or 4 of them and they're doing it. You give them the warning, then it's OC spray. Create the distance. You know what I'm saying? We are trained in all these things. We're not utilizing our tools properly. And some people may look at that differently. I'm telling you, if you take that stance, I've had protests with Black Lives Matter, with the KKK at the same time. And I've dealt when they went peaceful. You know why? Because I met with the leaders of both of that prior, and I set the precedent. And I'll let them know point blank. If anybody in your group violates, y'all are getting arrested immediately. I'm letting you know. You're the ones who put in for the permits. I'm coming after you personally. Yep. And when they know that, and they know you mean business, half the time they say, we're going to protest in another city.
Yep.
Because they know that city that I'm in, we're not going to tolerate that.
Yep.
They don't want that. They want weak, liberal leadership nowadays. And it's ridiculous. I could go on and on about, lack of accountability, privilege, and all these different things that are going on in our community. But today, as police, we're not judge, jury, and execution, but we have to be law and order. And if we forget that, we fail.
Wholeheartedly. So can you kind of explain to everybody what ADB is? We've kind of touched on it a little bit, and then how did you get involved in teaching with them?
Yeah, ADB is a different breed. It's basically a training. It's a training group or company, but it's much more than that. So we have ADB Training, and we have ADB Nation, which is kind of like a social media platform for law enforcement to be able to go behind the scenes and talk to people of all different walks of life and experiences and experience levels and talk about every single issue. And it's a safe place where we can ask questions and we can debate things and do things like that. So then also it's I could have gone and trained anywhere. I was working for another company before. I've trained for over 20 years. But when I met with Monty, Danny, the CEO, the head of this organization, and I talked to him and I found out his mindset, and I realized he's that less than 1%. And that's what I always believed I am, trying to make that change. Some of the things that we talked about here and had conversation about are all the things that ADB stands for. And that's where, I want to be a part of that movement, a movement where law enforcement comes together. And as we grow with this training with the ADB Nation, we'll have the ability to lobby, for maybe police chiefs contracts, like we talked about, where police chiefs across the nation can get contracts to be protected. So therefore they can be better leaders and protect their people. That's just a hypothetical. But what I'm saying is you have power in numbers, and ADB, the nation, brings everybody together. And that's why I'm a part of it. I want to be a part of some sort of a positive movement in law enforcement that doesn't tie my hands behind my back because they want to do politically correct speech or anything like that. It's raw. It's real. It's the stuff that we encounter every single day.
Preach it. I agree with that wholeheartedly, and I could have definitely not said that so eloquently. So I'm glad you did. Now let me ask you this: I'm going to have to bring you back because we've had such a great conversation that we really didn't even get into your stories. So I'm definitely going to have you back. But
we'll definitely do that.
But here's the deal: I want to give you the last few minutes to tell people where they can get your books, hard copies, audio books, where they can follow you, and reach out to you.
No, I appreciate that. So you can follow me on LinkedIn. It's hard for me if you send me an invite to connect on LinkedIn. I'm maxed out at 30,000, but I can have over 30,000 followers. That's probably my biggest platform where I send out messages. Another big platform would be to join the ADB Nation. I'm sure that Brent's going to put some sort of link maybe underneath this where people can go in and become part of the nation, and you can have private access to me. If you attend any of my trainings, my undercover schools, I have a 3-day undercover school and an advanced 7-day undercover school, and go to the ADB Nation, adbtraining.com, check it out. Look at all the different trainings that are offered out there. If you go to one of my courses, the course doesn't end there. My courses, you'll have access to me, and that's what ADB does as well. It brings you hand-to-hand, face-to-face, phone call to phone call with the instructors after the training. That's very unusual. Normally you go to a training, you don't get any access. You can also reach me besides social media, Facebook, stuff like that, as well as LinkedIn. You can also reach me on www.grounsellbooks.com. It's GROUNSELLBOOKS.com. That's my website. There's a lot of stuff on there. I got hundreds of videos on YouTube. I almost got banned from YouTube because I put some real stuff from international, like gunfights and stuff. And but some of the stuff I can't put on there anymore because they kind of prohibited me. But I try and put the real raw stuff out there. I have a podcast I do occasionally, but I really haven't had a lot of time to do that. But my books are all on Amazon. Just go type in Keith Grounsell or my books, as you can see in my background here. Leadership Under Fire is my leadership book. I have The Great Divider in Chief coming out next. Shattered Chains is all about human trafficking. Deep Cover is only a book that's offered to law enforcement if you go to one of my undercover schools. And then A Narc's Tale is a 4-book series about working deep undercover. Also have a book that's not on here. It's a children's book that I wrote because I felt like in society today, we're not teaching our kids or taking the time to have these opportunities, these conversations at a young age about, strangers, about appropriate touching, saying no to drugs, vaping, how to treat elders, not to cheat. All these things are in my book. It's called Caleb's Journey of Kindness. Basically, it's valuable lessons to teach our youth is the subtitle. And all that's on Amazon. All my books, except for the children's book, are available in audio, ebook, and paperback. The children's books just paperback and ebook. But man, feel free, reach out to me. I'm all over the place. Keith Grounsell. You can look me up. There's probably thousands of things. You'll see. I've been through the fire, man. I'm not a perfect leader by any means. I've made plenty of mistakes, but they've always been done with integrity. And when you do that, you sleep really good at night. I don't have to worry about looking over my shoulder like somebody will have something on me. So yeah, anytime anybody needs anything, man, you'd be shocked at how many people I talk to on a daily basis, like people just randomly messaging me. And I actually appreciate that. Go in, read some of my hundreds of reviews on my books on Amazon, and that'll kind of tell you about, what you're getting into. But man, I appreciate this opportunity. I definitely want to come back, have more conversations, because I really didn't get into, I have hundreds of stories of things that I've encountered and some of my people have encountered that have been life lessons. And I've grown from each and every one of them, from losing my partner, getting shot, killed by a drug dealer, to different things that have occurred in my life. And I feel like have molded me into who I am as a law enforcement officer and a man, and a man of God. My faith is my backing. My family comes first, and then my job. But I can tell you, I love my job, and I talk about it all the time because it's what we love.
Absolutely. Well, you're welcome whenever you're ready. Part two's on the table.
Absolutely.
And I thank you for sharing your knowledge with my people tonight. So we'll wrap up here, but you're welcome back.
Appreciate it, brother. Thank you,
Have a
man.
good night.
All right. You too. Bye-bye.